Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. I am Logan Cross, field technician for a subcontractor that services microwave relay towers and satellite ground equipment across the Canadian high Arctic. Our last scheduled circuit was supposed to hit Eureka Weather Station on Ellesmere Island and a pair of repeater masts east towards Nansen Sound. We were meant to finish before the winter flights tapered to occasional runs. The last Twin Otter that dropped us at Eureka taxied away with its skis biting into wind-packed snow, and we waved through our goggles and pulled the sleds toward the instrument huts. That was the last time I saw an aircraft touch the strip. By the second week, the situation down south turned from confusing to silent. The satellite phone would connect but never pass voice. The Inmarsat terminal locked to a bird but wouldn't handshake for data. On HF, I heard a ragged pileup on 7.150 megahertz, where people talked over each other about curfews and barricades, then a sudden empty band like someone turned the world off. The only consistent voice since then has been a ham operator 300 miles away in Resolute Bay who signs as Victor Alpha 2 Echo Romeo. He says his name is Daniel. He has the kind of patient tone people use when they are alone for too long. We came in as a team of 4. 2 tower guys from Iqaluit, me, and a logistics lead named Armin, who knew every odd bolt size and every trick for waking up diesel generators in -40. When the messages about the infection started, it felt like a mainland problem that would pass over us the way storms do when they break on the mountains. Then the pilots stopped replying to slot requests. Then the shortwave carried a different kind of weather. The 2 tower guys tried to take a tracked utility vehicle west toward a community outpost to see if the satellite uplink there could do better. They never made it back. After that, I moved everything into the main Eureka building. The kitchen wing with bunk rooms, the data room with the Campbell Scientific logger screens, the mechanical room where the Caterpillar generator lives in its metal shroud and thumps like a slow heart. I sealed the vestibules with plywood, stacked snow blocks into windbreaks, and rigged a plastic curtain inside the front airlock. The official station had been on care and maintenance status for months before we arrived, but the infrastructure remained. Weather masts with RM Young anemometers, a Vaisala salometer pointed into nothing, radiosonde balloons deflated and folded on a shelf. I inventoried rations. Environment and Climate Change Canada leaves good logistics files. Powdered eggs, tins of beef stew, bags of rice, crates of freeze-dried fruit, cases of instant coffee. The water plant was offline, so I started melting snow in stock pots and ran the melt through ceramic filters. The cold helps, the infected do not stop, but -40 slows everything to a heavy crawl. They move the way underdressed people move when the wind tears through every seam and the eyelashes freeze together. Their hands are bare too often. They do not use their hands well. They do not use tools. I saw that the first time they came to the station fence line. 2 figures moved out of the sastrugi in a wandering line, stopping to sway like they were listening. Their faces were gray with frost. One had a parka unzipped and the fur ruff crusted white. They pressed against the chain, breathed steam, and turned their heads toward the smell of the kitchen vent. They stood for hours and then fell and then stood again. I carry a Tikka T3 X rifle in .308, Winchester, and a Remington 870 pump with a short barrel. The rifle is for distance across the snowfields if I have to discourage wolves or a bear at the dump. The shotgun is for close in. I keep ammunition locked and counted. I do not speak loudly on the radio about any of that because I don't know who else is listening. I also carry bear spray in a chest holster inside my parka, where it stays warm enough to function, and a pen flare kit that fits in a pocket. I prefer noise and light to solve problems first. The routine keeps me level. Every morning, I check the fuel sump, drain off any water, and log diesel remaining by stick measurement in the day tank and the bulk tank. The generator drinks about 2 liters per hour under light load, with the lab equipment mostly off and only base heat, lighting, the data logger racks, and the radio gear running. I can stretch what remains for months. I circulate the heating loop and keep the mechanical room around 13 degrees Celsius to give the genset a decent life. I cycle the smaller portable Honda inverter generator twice a week to keep it from sulking. In the afternoons, I take the Scandic snowmobile in a short loop around the site. I follow the flagged path that leads across hard wind-packed drifts to the communications shed. I check that the microwave dish stays pointed where the line of sight would be if there were anyone left to talk to. Sometimes, I climb the ladder to the platform with a tool bag clipped to my harness, not to fix anything, but to look. In the far distance, the mountains are blue and sharp as saw blades. Closer, the airfield shows as 2 pale lines where the wind scoured to old ice. If the sun is up at all, it sits low and doesn't warm anything. At night, the aurora moves like slow curtains. I stand on the roof deck with the hood up and a thermos cup in both hands and watch the sky unroll. The green shapes reach from the ridge to the sea and fold themselves again. On nights like that, the HF bands get strange. Signals jump and fall. Daniel in Resolute Bay says the ionosphere is a mood ring that far north. He says keep trying 5300 kilohertz in the evenings and 40 meters during the day, and I will find him if I call slowly and listen more than I talk. He says the last transport that left his region carried blood packets for a medical center farther south, part of a routine resupply that had nothing to do with the outbreak on the news at the time. Then the outbreak stopped being on the news. Then the transport never checked in. He told me the aircraft tail number. He told me the planned route. Skip lane modified Basler BT-67, a turbine upgrade of a DC-3, meant to run Resolute to a field station stop and then down the chain. If it went down anywhere near me, it would be west along the old haul route, or across the channel toward Axel Heiberg. He thought he heard a weak emergency locator beacon once, but it faded into static and never came back, and nobody in any air coordination cell picked it up long enough to triangulate. If it carried medical cargo, it might also carry a secure SATCOM box and a battery bank worth something. It might carry a portable lab kit. It might carry a paper logbook that says who sent what and where it was going, and why anybody thought that made sense while the world was going the other direction. I know the terrain between Eureka and the Sound. The snow hides crevasse mouths in the old cracks where sea ice meets tide. This time of year, wind compacts the top 30 centimeters into a shell that can hold a person until it doesn't. If I go for the plane, I need a route plan, a turnback temperature and a shelter cache halfway. I need to mark fuel out and fuel back with a margin for whiteout. I need to pretend there is someone who will tell me no, and then do it anyway because there's nobody left to say no. I staged in the vehicle bay. I pulled the Scandic into the warmest corner and stripped the clutch cover to check the belt. I swapped for a fresh belt and lashed a spare to the rack. I greased the suspension until I saw a clean purge. I checked the carbides and the Hyfax. I strapped a Pelican case behind the seat with a compact stove, a small pot, hexamine tablets, storm matches, an aluminum shovel, a bivvy, and a one-person tent. I packed a folding saw, a fiber repair kit for the sled, a headlamp, extra lithium etolays, a Garmin eTrex GPS, and a paper map in a zip bag, a compass, and a PLB with good batteries. I added a med kit with hand warmers, duct tape, gauze, and a SAM splint. I strapped fuel jerrys along the sides, 40 liters total. I topped off engine oil, topped the tank, and ran the engine for 5 minutes to check for codes. I wrote my route on a whiteboard in the kitchen, though no one would read it. Out from Eureka, on the flagged line to the microwave spur, west to the ridge break, then turn northwest along the sheltered side toward the frozen stream bed that points like an arrow to the sound. There is an old emergency hut about 20 kilometers out. A fiberglass dome with a wood floor and a cot and a drum stove. If the hut is buried, I can dig the door and use it to cache food and fuel. I wrote my turn back at minus 45 Celsius wind chill sustained or visibility under 50 meters. If I lost the track in a ground blizzard, I would plant the tent and ride out the night rather than try to feel the way home by dead reckoning and hope. Before I left, I walked the perimeter once, slow, and listened. There were 2 infected near the dump, standing with their backs to the wind and their bodies rocking, as if the gusts could aim them. I fired a pen flare low, and the bright comet landed and hissed. They turned slowly and took a few steps toward it, then waited as if instructions would arrive. I slipped back inside. I hate the shotgun, not because of what it does, but because of what it asks me to be. If light and sound can move them away, I use that first. The ride out took most of a short day. The Scandic ran well. The cold floated around me as a physical thing. The first 10 kilometers were fast over hard, the next 10 a long slalom between drift lines tall as a truck, wind-carved with sharp edges. The hut was there under a tilting dune of snow. I parked in the lee and dug until the door creaked open and the smell of old wood and metal and mouse came out. Inside, the stove was intact, but the stovepipe had loosened. I reseated the elbow, scraped the rust, and burned 1 tablet to see if any smoke leaked. It drew fine. I left a sealed bag of rice, 4 bars, a liter of white gas, and 2 candles. I logged the cache in my notebook and on a bright card I nailed next to the door. Beyond the hut, the land opened into a wide pan where the stream had braided under wind-laid snow. The sky fell hazy as ice crystals thickened. I slowed to 20 kilometers per hour and watched the light change. The mountains on the left went flat and then vanished, and the world narrowed until the only depth cues were the wind streaks crossing the track at an angle. I thought about stopping, then the air cleared and I saw sastrugi aligned like ribs ahead. The GPS told me I was close to the waypoint, where the ridge breaks and the land tilts down to the sound. The aircraft showed itself not by metal, but by a line that did not belong to wind. A dark shape lay half-buried, and a tailplane lifted out of the snow at a wrong angle. I approached from downwind and cut the engine 50 meters short. The wind had scoured one side of the fuselage clean. The spinner cones were intact. 1 prop blade bent backward against the cowling. The other blades were feathered and buried. The tail number matched what Daniel gave me. A door hung open, its lower hinge broken, and a ramp of drifted snow led into the cargo space like a bad invitation. I stood and listened. Wind, the soft ticking of settling sheet metal. A distant crack from the ice far out on the sound. No voices, no movement. I slung the rifle and clipped the safety lanyard to the sled. I went in slow. The cargo bay smelled like cold metal, plastic, and a faint tang of something medicinal. Crates were ratchet-strapped to the floor grid. Some had popped loose and slammed forward in the landing. A pallet box with a red cross stencil lay buckled on one corner. There were webbed seats along the sides and a ladder forward to the cockpit. I did not look straight at the dark beyond the ladder. I listened. Nothing. I cut the strap on the medical pallet and peeled it back. Inside were insulated boxes with gel packs still cold enough to stick to my gloves. The labels read packed date and contents. What they held was plasma and platelets, pooled, screened, barcoded, routine logistics for clinics that handle emergencies. The blood wasn't the problem. Daniel's rumor about contamination might have been true somewhere else, but this flight looked like it carried what any region carries when people expect a normal world. On the second layer down, I found a compact diagnostic kit the size of a carry-on, a rugged case with a battery-powered centrifuge, test strips, and a small analyzer with paper instructions. I took it all. In the forward equipment bay, I found a sealed gray case with a cable reel. The label said satellite telephone kit and listed iridium. The handset sat in foam with a spare battery and a panel mount antenna. In the cockpit, the overhead breakers were all off. The right seat harness was still latched. The left seat was empty. There were no people. I checked the survival gear locker and found 2 vacuum-sealed sleeping bags, a tent, and a white hard case with a high-visibility vest draped over it. The case was a locator beacon with a replaceable battery brick and a broken antenna. The broken section lay in the footwell next to a boot print that had thawed and refroze. I stood in the cargo door and looked out across the white. If a crew walked away, the wind would erase them in an hour. But if they'd made a line for a ridge or a dark rock outcrop, I might pick a different texture in the snow. I circled the aircraft slow, eyes level, not at my feet. On the lee side, where the snow fell soft, I found a shallow trough that ran downwind for 10 meters and then vanished. It looked like someone had dragged a duffel, and then the surface crust broke and the line ended. I could follow it nowhere. I said out loud that I was sorry to no one. Then I went back to work. I filled the sled with what I could use at the station: the iridium kit, the diagnostic case, 3 insulated boxes still at temperature that might help someone later, a coil of tie-down webbing, a tool roll, a small step stool, and a roll of reflective safety tape. I left the blood I could not keep cold safe enough and marked the crate with a bright X on the manifest card and a note in my log to tell Daniel exactly where and what so he could pass it if there were any chain of custody left. I closed and lashed the cargo door as best I could to keep the snow from flooding it, and to make it look the same when I returned. On the ride back, the wind stiffened into a steady push from the northwest. Blown crystals stung the exposed strip of cheek beneath my goggles. I watched the GPS arrow and the flag course and the slight change in surface that meant I was back near the hut. I pulled in behind the drift and took 20 minutes to brew a small pot of water and drink half a cup of tea with sugar. The Skondik started on the first pull. I pointed its nose toward home and kept the speed just under comfortable so I could stop if the light went flat again. Home is a word that means walls that hold heat for a while. I pulled into the vehicle bay at Eureka and killed the engine and just stood listening to silence. Then I rolled the sled in and shut the overhead door and went through my arrivals checklist because that is how I anchor my mind. Fuel jerrys on the rack. Diagnostic case onto the stainless table. Iridium kit next to the HF set. I washed my hands with cold water and then warm water and then sanitizer like the bottles say. I put the rifle on the rack and locked it. I poured a second cup of tea and felt the heat in my chest, and the sting returned to my fingers as blood warmed them. The iridium came up fast on its internal battery. I took the antenna outside, clipped it to a handrail, and ran the cable through the door gap with a towel to protect the jacket. The handset reached the constellation clean and offered me a dial tone that felt like a lie. I tried numbers for the logistics office, for a search and rescue coordination center, for a government line. Some connected and gave me recordings that talked about high call volumes. Some never connected. One played a loop of a calm voice saying to remain in place and await instructions, then cut to static. I called Daniel on HF and told him what I found. He answered slow, the way you answer when you already know part of it and do not want to hear the rest. He asked me to read the tail number twice. He asked about the cockpit. He asked if I could stay on frequency while he tried to raise anyone else. I stayed, and the Aurora rolled. and the ionosphere moved, and our signals walked around each other. He came back with nothing changed. He told me to log everything. He told me to keep my generator hours low. He told me the local clinic in his town ran out of oxygen concentrator filters and improvised with vacuum cleaner filters, and now the town used them for heaters instead. He laughed once when he said that, the way people laugh when they do not want to say what else they saw. The infected at the fence never left. They froze into positions that looked like they were trying to listen. When the wind rose, they fell and no longer stood. A pair of Arctic foxes trotted past them one morning, wary, and then trotted faster. I rigged a snow berm to block the kitchen scent plume from the leeward side and moved the exhaust extension to a different angle. It mattered. Fewer shapes appeared out of the gray. With the diagnostic kit on the table, I had a purpose beyond keeping heat and water. It was meant for field clinics and required no network. The analyzer powered from an internal battery and calibrated with a strip. I ran its internal tests to make sure it hadn't been jarred into nonsense. It passed. The paper manual talked about basic panels, not about anything that touched the outbreak. Still, a thing that works is a thing worth saving. I inventoried every reactor cup and strip like they were gold. 3 days after the salvage run, a shape moved at the far end of the runway. The morning light was a thin band to the south. The shape resolved into a person on skis pulling a plastic sled. I watched through the Leupold scope with the rifle safe and the bolt open. The person moved in slow, even strokes. No drift step shuffle, no wasted motion. The parka was expedition blue with a fur ruff. The sled carried a duffel and a long case. The figure stopped at the outer marker and raised both hands. I left the rifle on the rack, took the shotgun in a flare, and went to the door. At 15 meters, I could see the frost on their eyelashes and the cracked ice on the neck gaiter. They lowered their hands and spoke in a voice that cracked but stayed level. The voice said their name was Maya Singh. She said she was a meteorologist from the Pearl Lab complex at Ridge Lab, the atmospheric observatory on the hill. She said her colleague stayed behind to keep the instruments from spinning in the wind and asked her to ask if Eureka had shelter and heat. I said it did. I said I would hold the shotgun down and open the door, and we would both go in slow and keep our hands where we could see them. She laughed, one tired breath, and nodded. Inside, she took off her mitts and set them palm up by the radiator like a person who knows how to take care of gear. She unzipped and sat and said thank you in a way that made it feel like a real word again. I poured hot water and stirred sugar in. She drank and set the mug down with both hands as if it weighed something. Her story came out in pieces between breaths. Pearl had run skeleton crews since autumn. When the messages started, they kept the LiDAR and aerosol instruments running as long as they could, because data mattered, even if the world pretended it didn't. 2 people there caught a ride south early and never reported in. She and her colleague stayed. Then the generator at their site developed a fuel delivery fault. Then a visitor came in the night. Then another. They moved the ladder and blocked the door with the optics crate. Her colleague told her to take the skis and go to Eureka for heat and shelter and to radio for help and to stop looking back. I made her eggs from powder and a piece of toast from the last loaf in the freezer. She ate with clean hands and small bites and did not pretend she wasn't hungry. When she finished, she asked where the restroom was and came back with her hair combed and her face washed and the kind of posture people use when they want to keep standing upright as a way to say they are still here. I showed her the bunk room and gave her the lower bunk near the wall where the heat pipes run. She'd slept for 9 hours. I sat in the data room and watched the logger screen scroll wind speeds and air temperatures, and the humidity trace that dives when the air goes brittle. When Maya woke, she helped me check fuel and heat like she had always worked here. She wrote her own notebook with clean numbers. She asked if the iridium worked. I told her it did, but it did not deliver anything worth hearing. She asked about the crash. I told her. She looked down a long time and then asked if the case I brought back included any way to check oxygen saturation for someone who had been exposed to smoke. I said the kit didn't include that, but I had a fingertip pulse oximeter in the med bag. She nodded. She said her colleague had spent a night burning damp wood when the heater sputtered and woke coughing. She said she worried the cough was turning into something else. We planned for Ridge Lab. It sits above Eureka, not far in distance, but the slope turns short steps into work and the wind finds every seam. We would go in daylight. We would take the Scandic with one sled and one emergency overnight kit. We would keep the engine warm with a cover if we shut down. We would signal with the handhelds on Channel 16, the ones that work building to building. I loaded the shotgun with less lethal rubber slugs up front and Buck behind it, because the first problem I want to solve with sound if the world lets me. I put the rifle on the sled in a scabbard and hoped to never touch it. We went in silence for the first kilometer. The snow squealed under the tracks with that dry, cold noise that says -30 or worse. Maya tapped my shoulder and used one hand to point. 3 figures stood near the bottom of the slope, spaced like fence posts. They did not wear proper winter gear. One had sleeves pushed to the elbows as if it were spring. Their heads moved in small arcs as if they were trying to read the air. I swung us wide and kept the engine quiet as I could. We made a long arc around them and climbed the ridge in a slow, even line. None of them followed. None of them slipped. They just turned in place as if a smell had moved. Ridge Lab looked tired. The exterior stairs were rimed, and a snow cornice hung over the west wall like a wave about to break. The main door was blocked by a snowdrift and a dumpster turned on its side. We went to the service door. I knocked. The sound was small in the wind. After a long minute, I heard metal move and the door opened 10 centimeters and then wider. A face looked out from inside a hood. He was thin and pale, with red around the eyes. He said his name was Tomasz. He smiled like a man who had not decided whether this was a dream. Inside, the air carried a trace of smoke under the clean chemical smell of the lab. The heater panel was open. The fuel filter sat on a rag, dark. The spare filter lay in a package that looked like it had been sealed for a decade. Tomasz coughed into the crook of his elbow and waved it off as a cold. He walked around the lab and showed us the equipment as if we were visiting students. The LiDAR sat quiet. The aerosol sampler turned slowly. He ran his hand over the console and said he wanted to turn it all off properly if he could not run it, because he could not stand to have it freewheel. We changed the filter, bled the line, and fired the heater. It turned over, coughed once, and settled into a steady whir. The temperature in the room rose 1 visible degree when frost retreated from a patch of metal. I gave Tomasz the oximeter and he clipped it on and watched the number like it could tell him the future. It drifted in the low 90s and climbed to 95 with rest. He smiled like he could accept that for now. Maya went through their pantry and made tea and a packet soup. She moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knows the layout. The visitors came at noon, when the light was at its brightest, which means dim and flat and undependable. The motion sensor at the back of the lab chimed once. Tomasz froze. I walked to the narrow window. 3 figures stood at the bottom of the steps in a loose triangle. They faced the door, not the window. One tilted its head to the side like a dog hearing something far away. Their cheeks were white with frost. I tapped the glass with my knuckle. All 3 turned toward the sound. We did not open the door. Maya whispered that if we let them stay, they would attract more. She suggested flares from the roof. I nodded. We climbed the interior stairs to the roof hatch, and I pushed it slowly and felt the wind reach in. The cornice on the west wall worried me, but the roof itself was solid. We leaned out and fired 2 flares high. The bright light arced and hissed. The 3 figures below turned as one, tracked the light like cats track a laser, and walked in that direction in lines that wandered. We waited. One slipped. One stayed on hands and knees for a long time as if trying to decide what those were. Then they vanished over the slight roll of the ground. We left a care package and a radio at Rio Ridge Lab and asked Tomasz to call if he saw more than 3 or if he saw animals acting wrong. He nodded and looked at the oximeter again and smiled properly. On the way back down, we saw a fresh set of fox tracks crossing our own. The fox moved with purpose. It had a place to be. I took that as a good sign. Back at Eureka, I moved the diagnostic kit into a closet where the temperature stayed closest to room temperature. Inventory on a clipboard on a hook. I placed the Iridium handset in a charging cradle and set a schedule for calls. 3 tries a day to 3 numbers I wrote on a notepad and left on a nail by the phone. Routine matters. We added a whiteboard for meals and a chore list like any shared hut. Snow melt duty, stove duty, generator watch, perimeter walk. None of it made the world further south change. All of it made this small world feel less like a waiting room. On the 4th night after we found Tomasz, the wind calmed and the sky exploded with aurora. Curtains, arcs, slow waves like a green ocean turned upside down, all right. I took the long ladder and climbed to the roof and listened to the HF sets click and settle with each slow shift of the band. I called Daniel. He answered with a voice like he'd been sitting half asleep with the microphone in his hand for an hour. I told him about the aircraft and the labels and the intact diagnostic kit and the broken beacon antenna and the single boot print thawed and refrozen in the cockpit. He said thank you in a way that meant something. He said his town had seen the first truly cold night. He said the number of visitors dropped when the wind cut skin in seconds. He said he didn't think that would last. He told me a thing I could not unhear. He said a clinic farther south reported a batch of plasma bags that tested clean on intake and then flagged on use with a rapid test that someone decided to run because a patient developed a fever mid-transfusion and nothing made sense anymore. He said those bags were traced back through 2 hubs to a facility that had since gone quiet. He said the transport that went missing carried standard stocks, not that batch, but the rumor about blood wasn't a rumor at all, just misapplied and amplified in the way rumors are. He said the lesson was that nothing is simple when people are scared. I said I understood. I looked at the green sky and thought about how quiet a cold aircraft feels after a crash and how a label can be true and useless at the same time. We settled into a rhythm. We made hot water bottles for feet at night. We rationed fuel by hours and load and logged each start and stop. We checked for ice buildup in vents. We maintained a path with snow shovels the way you maintain a mind with small tasks. We walked to Ridge Lab every 3 days as long as light and wind allowed. We used flares if we saw visitors. We never opened doors to an unknown knock. We kept our voices low. In late afternoon on the 9th day since the salvage run, a small dot appeared where the approach lights used to be. I put binoculars to my eyes and saw a person in a red parka moving with an efficiency that told me everything before they got close. Their gait was deliberate. Their hands were covered. Their face was masked. They pulled a sledge with one case on it. They stopped at the perimeter and raised both hands. I went out with Maya behind me. The person introduced herself as Captain Jenna Morris, Canadian Rangers out of Resolute, detached weeks ago on a patrol that had not ended. She looked at the fence, the snow berms, the sealed windows, and nodded once like a checklist had been met. She said she had a message from Daniel and a request of her own. She said she carried a small HF man pack that could fill a gap in our coverage and a packet of typed sheets in a plastic bag that amounted to a regional notice to air crews, if any remained. She asked for a cup of hot tea and any intelligence we had on visitors and movement south of here. She gestured toward her sledge and said the case on it was for us if we still had power. Inside, she unzipped the case and revealed a portable water purifier with a hand pump and ceramic elements that could be cleaned and reused, plus a small ultraviolet lamp wand that could sterilize clear meltwater in a few minutes. She said she had another case for Ridge Lab with heater service parts if we could deliver or escort. She said her patrol had split when they reached impassable sea ice, and she had been alone for 2 days. She said the infected grow less predictable when the temperature stays under -30, not more, and she said she prefers predictable. We traded knowledge for an hour. She told us which routes held drift traps that would swallow a machine. She told us a polar bear had been circling a cache on the coast, thin and determined, and that we should keep a flare gun ready near any door even in daylight. I told her about the aircraft and the salvage and the diagnostic kit and the broken beacon antenna. She nodded and said we did the right thing closing it up and marking it. She asked about ammunition and I told her what we had and what we didn't. She opened a side pouch and set 2 boxes of 12-gauge birdshot on the table as if she were placing sugar, then 1 box of slugs. She said she preferred the noise and the fear of light over anything else, and that aligned with my own list. When she finished her tea, she asked to use the iridium. She dialed a number from her head, listened, and then left a message in clear, unhurried words that mentioned grid references and times and weather and ended with this phrase: "Remain in place and conserve heat." Then she set the phone down, looked at me, and asked if we were willing to help her search for a beacon she thought she heard last night. A weak pulse on a frequency that didn't belong to any of our gear. She thought it might be a handheld PLB left on by someone who couldn't turn it off and didn't know they should. We prepared to go at first light. Jenna checked the Scandic like she was reading a book. She asked about our turnback points and nodded at the numbers. She tightened 1 strap on the sled and loosened another and didn't explain, which is how you know someone knows what they're doing. We took 2 extra flares, the shotgun in the scabbard and the rifle still locked on the rack. We took food for 2 days and fuel for longer and a small bag of tools that would let us make ugly repairs that keep you alive. The beacon led us southeast into folds of terrain where the wind had carved bowls. The signal was a whisper we could only hear atop the drift lines. Every time we dipped into a hollow, it vanished. We leapfrogged the way you leapfrog a poor radio. 1 person climbs, listens, marks, and waves the other forward. We found the source after midday under a drift at the base of a metal stake that marked an old research line. The PLB lay half exposed. The red LED pulsed. No tracks circled it. We dug careful circles wider and wider. The shovel hit canvas and then plastic and then a rope. We cleared a body bag that was empty. We found a second bag under it, also empty and zipped halfway. Then we found a duffel with medical gear and a field notebook. The notebook belonged to a nurse practitioner who had been accompanying a research traverse in a Haglund's tracked vehicle that broke a track and stayed in place while some of the team skied to get help. The nurse wrote in clean block letters about a visitor who arrived 2 nights in a row and watched from the edge of camp and didn't respond to calls. She wrote that one of the team left a PLB on a stake in case someone passed by while they were away. The last entry said, "If the wind picks up, stay put, conserve heat, we'll be back." We packed the PLB and the notebook and resealed the bags and left them where they were as markers, because markers matter even if there is nobody left to read them. On the way back, the wind finally rose to the level where it grabbed the skis and made the machine squirm. We fought it for 2 hours and returned to Eureka with the kind of exhaustion that makes your hands clumsy and your voice flat. Inside, The generator's steady thrum felt like a heartbeat you could lean against. That night, we made a meal that felt like a holiday. Rice with a tin of chicken and a packet of soy sauce we found at the back of a shelf. Tea with sugar, a small square of chocolate each. We went over the notebook with clean fingers. The names meant nothing to us and everything to someone. We wrote a copy of the last pages on a separate sheet in case we had to pass the original on. We added the grid reference to the whiteboard next to the aircraft coordinates. The days grew shorter and the routine held. We moved with purpose. We spoke quietly. We slept in shifts when the wind came up and made the building creak in a way that set nerves on edge. We learned the sound of a fox stepping on hard crust and the sound of a visitor in soft boots and the sound of the wind finding a loose sheet of tin. We kept the shotgun near the door and the flares closer. We didn't use the rifle. We hoped to never use it. Daniel's voice thinned as the aurora grew more active, then strengthened on nights when the sky went dull. He passed messages that were more like weather observations for the human condition. A settlement to the west consolidated into 2 buildings and ran 1 generator on a strict schedule. A group on the coast moved into a fuel depot and learned how to bleed water from tanks. A team farther south built a greenhouse from plastic sheeting and heat lamps and kept lettuce alive. A family tried to drive north on a road that ended at a frozen river, and they did not call again. He balanced what he told us. He told us enough. He did not tell us every detail. We grew into a small crew that could work without speaking. Maya could read a wind change by the way the smoke from a match moved in the lee of a glove. Tomasz could hear a heater bearing before it would fail. Jenna could look at a sastrugi field and say which line would hold and which would trap a machine. I could keep a generator happy and a radio alive. We wrote it all down like a field manual no one might ever read. It is easy to think survival is a single act. It is not. It is the 97th act after the 96th that look the same. It is refilling the snowmelt pot before bed so you don't wake to ice. It is opening the vent every morning to tap the frost so it doesn't block when you need draft. It is checking that the shotgun chamber is empty when you hand it to someone and they check again because you love them enough to be boring. On the 20th day since the salvage run, we made 1 more trip to the aircraft. We brought better tools and better tape and a printed placard in a plastic sleeve that said in large letters that the site was secured and inventoried and to contact Eureka Station on HF if anyone with authority still wanted to enforce authority. We recovered the locator beacon and replaced the broken antenna with a stub I machined from a spare VHF whip and a connector that mostly fit. We set it to periodic transmit and logged the time. I do not know who I expected to hear it. I did it because a signal in the air feels like a promise. The cold will deepen. The sky will turn to night that lasts. We will count hours and liters and matches. We will make decisions about when to be loud and when to be quiet. We will climb to the roof and watch for aircraft lights that may never appear and send our own light up anyway, because light is not only for being seen, it is for seeing. I hear Daniel in my head when the HF is silent. He says, "Keep a schedule, keep your battery warm, keep your mind warmer." He says, "The world runs on small acts more than on big ones." He says, "If you find a thing that works, write down how, because you will forget on a bad day." If someone hears this later and wonders what mattered, it was this. We stayed. We kept the heaters slow so the fuel would stretch. We listened more than we talked. We didn't open doors to the wrong knocks. We helped where we could reach and left markers where we couldn't. We did not pretend the cold was our friend, but we learned it was not our enemy either. It was a tool that kept the worst of the infection slow and the best of our plans sharp. Tomorrow at 9:15 in the morning, If the wind holds below 20 knots and the wind chill stays above -45, we will take a load of heater parts up to Ridge Lab and help Thomas shut down a LiDAR properly to save it for a future we hope still has students. We will swing wide around the standers near the slope. We will carry flares in our pockets and keep our goggles clear with a smear of dish soap like we always do. We will log the trip on the board so that if someone comes after, they will know where we went and why, and they will see that someone cared enough to write it down. If I can raise Daniel after that, I will read him our numbers in a calm voice. If I cannot, I will set the handset down and make tea and check fuel and walk the perimeter and tighten the stovepipe collar and look at the sky. The aurora will move or it won't. The wind will rise or it won't. We will keep doing the small acts that add up to staying. And if an aircraft light appears one night at the edge of the world, drifting low and steady, I will step to the roof with a flare in each hand and say into the radio, clear and slow, that Eureka Station is occupied, heat is on, water is safe, danger is present but manageable, and we can receive. If no aircraft comes, the message remains the same. We can receive. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.